institutions for sustainable food systems transformation in Africa. This conference is hosted by ISRABAM in Dakar, Senegal, and sponsored by key partners including the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, through the Feed and Future Innovation Lab for Food Security Policy, Research, Capacity and Influence, PRCI.
Yes, and come closer. There are remaining empty seats. Please move closer to the front chairs. S'il vous plaît, mesdames et messieurs, rapprochez-vous des premières rangées. Il y a encore des chaises inoccupées. Merci. Merci, madame. Merci. Thank you for coming back. We will now resume. We will have the session 5, but before that, I will invite Dr. Anthony to give us the opening remarks, and then hand over to Danielle Nierenberg, the president of the Food Tank Research and Advocacy Institute. Dr. Anthony, the floor is yours. A round of applause for him.
It's not opening remarks per se, but I'm going to set the stage for this session. I'm going to use Menti, so it will be interactive, so that we can try to gather some data. Essentially, I think if you look at ANAPRI and other think tanks in Africa, they are having difficulties. And these difficulties mostly stem from funding. They have a huge funding gap. What we've also seen is that the development partners have also changed the way they do business. They are now asking for impact. And what I've observed across most of our research institutes or research centers are not ready to change. Most of our researchers are not trained to do certain kinds of research to be able to respond to the demands of today. That's why I always say, as researchers, you have to keep your ears very open, because if you don't listen to the policymakers, to listen to what they want, then you are not relevant. And when you are not relevant, then it means that you will not receive the attention or the funding you need. So this, to me, is very important as we try to navigate the changing environment. And also, one thing that I think I've observed is that we are having a lot of international organizations coming to Africa and setting up shop as local institutions. And it's a good thing, and also it's a bad thing, because they are exerting unnecessary pressure to the local institutions. But I say, it's important as institutions to realize that this landscape is changing, and how you position yourself in terms of how you relate to these institutions. So collaboration is one of those things that we have to do. Also, how do we get our governments to fund what we do? And this morning we had a partners breakfast, and we were just talking about the diversity of in terms of ANAPRI membership. We're quite diverse. We have private institutions, but non-profit. We have institutions that are affiliated with universities. We have quasi-government institutions. So we are quite diverse, and the demands for our services are totally different. And also the way we raise resources is quite different. So what we have done in this session, we're supposed to break into groups and do all these different things, but because we are running behind, we thought that we could rejigger it and have it as a plenary session. So we are, and also you saw that we removed chairs at the back there, so that at least it's more cozy and more interactive. So please, if you can go to menti.com and enter that code. Let me know if you've managed to go in.
Please join menti.com using your phones or computers, and then enter the code 6276-2309.
And even those online you can do.
Let us know if you are in. Please raise your hands if you are in. Thank you.
I think it's good enough. We will see. Because this is a live, we're collecting data, so it's good. So please, the next slide, please. Oh, you want the code again? No, it's there. So right on top. So
6276-2309.
6276-2309. So in one word, describe the current funding landscape for agricultural and food systems research in, oh sorry, I put it in one word, so it's just in one word, describe the current funding landscape for agricultural and food systems research. Keep those answers coming. Challenging, pathetic, unsustainable, unpredictable. Inconsistent, targeted, deplorable, insufficient, erratic, poor. Nothing very fantastic coming up, is there? Okay, we will, how many? We have 45 responses. Maybe we'll allow maybe another 30 seconds to close this one. I think fortunately you might not be able to vote twice unless if you are using two gadgets, right? So there's no rigging. We have an issue of rigging in elections. So. Okay, so what you see, basically we have from 76 responses we've received. The major thing I think coming out there is that it is challenging, it is poor, very difficult, insufficient, and unpredictable. And that's the reality. That's where we are. And we need to find solutions. Next slide, please. In one word, how would you describe the current funding situation for your organization? This does not apply to Alan. Alan is from BMGF, so he's sitting pretty there. He has a different problem, yes. It's where to get it, who to fund. So we need those ideas. Alan will tell us exactly what he needs. This is multiple choice. So essentially this question is intended for you to see your biggest challenge and try to work around it. And you are not alone. So far we have received how many responses here, but I think another 30 seconds and then we close. So essentially we have the short-term cycle coming first, then inconsistent government support second, then competition from international funders third, then almost close between lack of donor interest and lack of awareness and visibility coming close to each other. So essentially, the inconsistent government support is one of the major issues, and we need to find ways of dealing with that. I can see the gap is closing between international competition from international organizations and government support. But the major one is just the short-term nature of the funding, right? Is people don't look into the long term. So I think when Mill was presenting first day, he talked about core funding. Core funding is very important. For you to sustain any institution, you need to have core. And by core, we mean you need those offices to run, even if you don't have any projects going. You need the research director to be there, you need the executive director, you need the finance person. So where are we going to get this core funding? So that's one critical question I think that we will need Daniel to really find solutions so that we can help institutions around this question. Next, please. How has reduced funding impacted your organization capacity to conduct research? This is also multiple choice. Please. You have 30 seconds. There are some who are enjoying, I can see. But the majority are saying that it has significantly reduced their capacity, basically, because of funding. 10 more seconds. But basically, I think there's a it's very clear here that it is significantly reduced, meaning we will need to find solutions. I think that's very important. If we don't find solutions, then we are going to become irrelevant. Next, please. On a scale from 1 to 5, how confident are you in your organization's ability to adapt to the shifting funding landscape? This one is interesting. We want to see whether you are worth running those institutions. And as researchers, I can see people tend to be in the middle, yeah? What is it called? You're talking about distributions here. So essentially, we are in the middle. There is very few people who are very confident. And I'm hoping that by the end of this session, people will be confident. Because I truly believe if you listen to what is happening on the ground, you will be able to open those doors. But if you don't listen, I can tell you, it's going to be very challenging for you as institutions to be able to get the funding you need. Let's go next, please. What challenges have you encountered in aligning with the evolving expectations of donors? This is open. So open, you can type whatever you want to type. No one is typing yet. You can even type in French too, it's fine, or even in Chui. Alan, you see, says donors have their own favorites. Meeting donors' expectations. Expectations are ever changing. Moving target. It's only 8 responses, and we have more than 60 people here. Okay, increasing. I'm thinking when we get to 60, then I'll move on to the next question. So essentially, this is where your solutions will lie, all right? Because once you identify the challenge, then you can say, okay, what solutions do I need to put in place to be able to get sorting the circles from squares, whatever that means, I don't know. Okay. You see, this new it's technology. I'm trying to use technology to collect it. All right, we have 6 groups found, 14, 20, okay, we're almost, okay, next. But basically this is intended for us to refine the way we move on. Rank the following strategies in order of effectiveness in securing long-term funding. So we're first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Rank them in order of importance. 1 is adopting research focus to align with donor priorities. Diversifying funding sources, increasing engagement with private sector, strengthening impact measurement and reporting, collaborating more closely with government. So you can see the system is not yet stable, so I can't say anything. I don't know which one is ranked first. But of course, I think diversifying funding sources is coming first there. Basically, we need to look beyond what we currently have. Is that right? And the other ones seem to be equally ranked. It seems as if people feel almost the same, but of course, we're first. First is diversifying, which is standing out. Not stable, the second, third, and fourth. So basically, you can see what strategies would work, and that's what you're saying. So increasing engagement with just changed. You see, second is gone, but first one is stable. Is that right? That we need to diversify our funding, and diversifying our funding, I think we would have a discussion around that. Can we go to the next question? What innovative approaches have you considered to enhance your organization's sustainability in this changing environment? 30 seconds. I think here you have to be a little bit descriptive, both when it's okay, diversification, collaboration, fundraising, focus on private sector, focusing on research for impact, engagement, general private good research. I think that one is very key. How do you fund no, that's private goods, okay. I thought public, I was going to make a comment on public goods. Quality, talent, recruitment, 39, 40 responses, please. You see, when the program has not yet started grouping, because we have divergent views, 51. When we get to 60, we move on to the next one. So this I will send to you after this, so that at least you can see where we are. Okay, I think we can stop this one. We can go to the next one. Rank what types of funding sources do you consider most promising for your organization's future? So we have government grants, private sector partnership, philanthropic foundations, international donors, project funding, consultancies. So why this question is, once we know who can fund, we have to develop a strategy around how they can fund. We have 20 more seconds. I see we have our government going forth. We will need to figure out why. You don't, because, and they are fifth now on the list. But basically, I think from my observation, we need to find ways and means of how we can get our governments to pay for the services we provide. We are doing these things for our own, so they also need to be able to pay for the services. Because there's this word that says, who pays the piper plays the tune. And these are the ones who say that. So we would like them to pay so that they can play the tune. So we need to find strategies of how to deal with government funding our thing. So it should be the last one. Can you do, maybe this is the last one, can you? Okay, can you go to the next one? One, two. That's the last one? Can you just go to the next one? This is how optimistic are you about future for funding for policy research? I think I was talking to somebody who said that it seems as if there's a movement that is discouraging people producing research for policy making. So, yeah, so you know there are conspiracy theorists. So let's see what. So essentially, people are moderately optimistic. So we need to find out why. So this is very important. There is nobody who is very optimistic. But that's good to know. We need to find out why you are not very in terms of funding. Can you go next, please? Okay, thank you very much. At least the results were coming. I never rigged anything. So.
Conversation flowing. It will not be cafe style, as was said before. We're going to have a very open discussion. And you should know that I do this all the time. I just came from Azerbaijan to here, where I moderated over 30 conversations over the course of 7 days. So I'm fairly good at this and fairly good at teasing out some of the questions that need to be answered. I know for the translators, I speak very fast, so I will try to slow down a little bit. But I'm American. I apologize. I'm sorry. So I want to thank Dr. Antony and for everyone who organized this event for including me. I'll also be moderating your next session. It's an honor to be here. There's so much talent in this room, and I know that the solutions for Africa are very homegrown. So you should applaud yourselves for being here and taking on these issues so eloquently. So please give yourselves a round of applause. Let's keep the energy up. I am going to end at 1 p.m. for sure. So we're only going to have a time for a few questions. And the survey that you saw, I kind of felt depressed by it. So I want us to focus on solutions and how we can be optimistic about new funding, different ways of funding, and how the funding and donor communities and the private sector and governments can all really take a huge step in changing how funding looks and who gets it. So I want to start with a sort of a general question for the funders and donors in the room, and that's how have your funding priorities for think tanks and policy research organizations evolved over the past decade, and what kinds of demands you have? And so that's a very complex question. I have been told that I can turn to Alan from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to sort of kick us off. I hope he's still in the room. There he is. Hey, Alan. I am very interested because one of my very first grants when I was a researcher in Washington, D.C. was from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I know you've changed some of your funding priorities dramatically. That was a million years ago. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on how funding is changing and what your priorities are.
Sure. So maybe I'll just run to the front so I'm facing the audience. Thank you for the question. Anthony joked that I was the only person in the room that doesn't have a funding issue because I work for the Gates Foundation. But for the first time in 24 years, the Gates Foundation has a cap on its funding. It's an enormous cap. It's $9 billion per year is our capped payout. But what that actually means, that's a huge amount of money every year, but it's very serious because we face that real budget pressure now, and so we have to trade off agriculture, women's empowerment, US education, malaria, financial services for the poor, this huge wide array of areas that we invest into. We're now under pressure to say it's this and not this. It's not everything increase. So agriculture, the sector, the team that I'm part of, has got budget pressure. Translates into agriculture because we have a cap. So the funding landscape has actually changed, is in the process of changing at the Gates Foundation. And it's also important to note the type of funder we are. We're a catalytic risk-taking investor, right? So we don't tend to pay general operating costs, core support for most of our partners. There are one or two exceptions, but for the vast majority of the hundreds of grantees that we work with in agriculture, we do not pay core budget support, right? So there's a project element there, and it's always been there, and it will probably always continue to be there. So when Anthony is, so we're in it for the long haul with partners who can demonstrate that they are moving the needle. And ANAPRI is one of those partners. The session we'll have this afternoon when we talk about the PPVC project, that has shot right to the top of the charts in AgDev in our team because it's demonstrating.
But once you sort of catalyze a think tank or an organization, how do you help them get How do you help them get funding from other organizations, other funders later on?
So that's a good.
Other funders later on.
So that's a good question. It's to talk to anyone in this world and advocate for the best bets that we've invested in. Right? We have plenty of investments that fail, but that's what a risk investor should be doing. There should be a high proportion that don't make it. If they all are successful, we're not taking enough risk. Right? So if you all can demonstrate real impact through your great work, then the foundation can put its voice behind, do more of this, other development partners, but more particularly, and this is like, I was shocked by some of the Menti results, governments themselves, right? If they see value in what you're doing in time, they should be paying for those services. And governments, like everyone else, have got many competing interests in terms of what they could be funding. But if you can demonstrate value add for your governments, that's extremely important. So, yeah, that's...
Thank you so much, Alan. Please give him a round of applause. That was great. He was put on the spot and handled it very well. I want to keep this conversation going about, the MC is coming up, so I might be interrupted, about the value added that these organizations, all of you in this room, Alan talked about best bets. This room is full of best bets that organizations, including the private sector, governments, and of course the donor and funding communities should invest in. But how do you demonstrate your value added when it comes to farmers, smallholder farmers, SMEs, and other things that you think need investment in your country or your community? If any other donors want to weigh in too, I know our friends from AGRA have lots of thoughts on on how funding should be allocated?
Thank you very much. My name is Nagaovna. I am the head of market and trade program in AGRA, and I was previously with the policy program in AGRA before I moved on. And I knew Alan for a long time, working together. So we don't really, in AGRA per se, fund, long-term research. So we have very targeted policy issues related to particular development problems. So what we would like to do is, yesterday we had a lot of discussion about the relevance of research, how it addresses the government needs, the quality, etc. So many of us in the economics profession would like to have those elegant methodologies and quality of data and rigor, etc. But, development organizations and governments need quick results. So, timely responses is quite relevant. So, Anthony demonstrated the use of ICT to get how long would have taken to do this research if you do it in a traditional way? 2 months, right? Many resources. So this is a kind of demonstration of how adaptive we should be. And secondly, we spend a lot of time, resources on consultancy. This is one of our delivery models because we don't have the bandwidth to address all the challenges we're facing. So AGRA hires a lot of consulting firms, and many of them are quickly able to respond to our problems. So this is where we get a lot of proposals from research institutes. So the ability really to write, convincing proposals with clear agenda and timetables is quite lacking. I have seen it myself evaluating a number of consultancy proposals. And the other is communication. It was mentioned yesterday. We generate, reports that are not really understandable to policymakers. But policymakers, need, something that's really in a heuristic language. With several examples of where, in one instance, I did a policy project to convince government to lift taxation on mechanization equipment. So our study was actually the fourth one. There were 3 others before us. And when we presented it to the Ministry of Finance, they accepted the one we presented. The reason being we used a very simple benefit cost analysis. It showed to the government the foregone tax, how much they would be losing by lifting the taxes, how much future benefits would be generated because of that policy change, and in the long run generating bigger tax benefits. So this kind of trade-off analysis attached dollar values is really convincing to the government. And then the other thing is we have to also expand our toolkit. Instead of the traditional, econometric analysis, blah, blah, AI and machine learning are really coming. AGRA has adopted now, data and analytics team. They are supporting us, to predict how many jobs we can generate in different villages through machine learning, which has really amazing level of predictability. So we have to really expand our toolkits. Consulting firms like McKinsey, Dalberg, they have very standardized, simple tools. They don't need so much data as we are collecting in traditional research, but they are able to generate results because we don't need 100% accuracy for policy change. Sometimes it's really directional, right? So this is the kind of change that our research systems should really take into account. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please give him a round of applause. You bring up an important question that I think is relevant to the think tanks and the nonprofits in this room. This idea of communicating and storytelling is very important. If you can't tell your story well, you can't get funded well. And so I'm interested in hearing from some of the organizations in the room, what do you need to tell your story better? Don't everyone raise their hand at once. I will call on people. I will just come out in the audience and put a microphone in front of you. Hey, Bill Burke, thank you. Oh, let's go there. Can we go to our lady friend first, please? Thank you. Always.
Thank you. I think I am Fatou from Israbam. To tell our story better, first we need partnerships because we don't have, sometimes we don't have required skills to communicate with policymakers. And in some projects, we tried to find partners like civil society. When we have our results, we partner with civil society. We can partner with farmer organizations who has this lobbying skill. We don't have it. And so we need them to communicate. We need also a communication staff. That's what changed our engagement at Israbam, for example. When we hired a communication specialist, it changed everything. We are having more impact, we are communicating our results, and we receive many requests from policymakers. Before we had him, we were not able to communicate our results. We were writing good reports, night papers, but they were not helpful for the policymakers. So two things, communication staff and also partnerships.
Right, because if you write these reports and they just sit on your laptop or sit on a shelf and they don't reach the people they need, they won't get attention and you won't get funding. Dr. Burke?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Fatou, for your response, because I think it goes to the point of bringing it back to core support, right? I mean, you're not going to find project-based funding that includes a communication staff, right? And so core support is really important. And I would actually push back a little bit on what my former boss, Anthony Chapoto, said, that core support is helpful when there are no projects. To me, I think core support is the ability to define your own research agenda separate from or in addition to what the projects want you to fund. And in addition to that, when you have that core support, you also can maintain a communication staff and an administrative staff and relationships with government and all these things, right? So core support is really important for that. And yeah, how we define core support is important. I took down a couple of notes. Oh, and the other thing is local government funding. It's really encouraging to see so many institutions realizing the importance of having local funding. But I also think it's disingenuous to say that that should be the only support, or we should be working towards that being the only support, right? The investments, maybe with the exception of the Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, this is not an altruistic investment that governments particularly are making, right? There's reasons that other countries invest in seeing policies based on evidence, right? It benefits everyone. There's a global public good aspect to this, and so that should be recognized as well, I think. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Please give him a round of applause. Dr. Anthony has his hand up.
Dec, I would like you to give us some insights how you relate to a think tank in South Africa. Suppose you are from the Western Cape government, so how do you provide that support? And I think that can provide some insights.
Okay, I'm from the Western Cape. It's a small province in South Africa, so it's not a national government, and we have to adhere to national rules and regulations, and our resources are limited, which brings me to a few things. We get approached by a lot of organizations with bright ideas, you know, and what they may think is cutting edge technology. And I've often wished that those people understand my business. As it is the principle of research to understand agriculture, I think it is important to organizations to understand my business. How does government work? An example. Normally in the Western Cape, around March, April, there's a budget speech. The ministers stand up in provincial parliament, made a speech and say we are going to give X amount to research, extension, training, etc., etc. The next day there are a lot of people knocking on the door and say the minister awarded 200 million rand for research. We've got this wonderful project, we want some of that money. First, that money, that decision on where to spend it, the budget speech is in March. That decision has already been taken in October on where it goes. So I think that's the first thing, understand the business. Yesterday, I learned a new word. And that new word is best end solution. And we must also understand that government consists out of, I think, quite a large number of different entities which are separate, they've got their own funding, their own priorities, everything like that. So the first thing is to understand that different priorities. The second is to understand, to reach to that best end solution. Who are all the different government entities you need to get on board? Just as an example, there was in the Western Cape, there was a very simple project. Somewhere along the line, okay, you must now stop me if I'm digressing too much because
I'll stop you.
In the Western Cape, we are a winter rainfall region. In other words, anything we produce, we have to capture the water for the summer months when there's the need for irrigation. About 40 years ago, the engineers get overexcited and they build a dam, the Brandvlei Dam. They build the wall 20% too high. So for whatever reason. So it's an outside river dam. So the dam can only be filled with a canal. So that dam can never fill beyond 80%. So one solution is very simple, to build on that canal 2 walls on the side 30 centimeter high for 6 kilometers at the cost of about $1 million US. And with that you can irrigate 4,400 hectares. It's a no-brain solution. But to get that simple project going, I had to get 17 government departments and entities around the table, because each of them has got a very specific mandate, authorities that they have to give, etc. So that is part of understanding the system. It is to get to this best end solution, you quite often need quite a number of government entities. I think one of the things is also, and the last point I want to make is that yesterday I've listened to localization and dialogue and things like that. I think that we must understand that without evidence along the line, dialogue will only lead to the lowest common denominator being accepted. What I mean is, if you get all these groups around the table, and never forget, there was now a comment about getting civil society on board to lobby. Be careful for that. Because what about the people that got negatively, unless there is some form of evidence that you can put on the table, you will not move from that list of lowest common denominator. Okay, I'm going to stop.
Thank you so much. Please give him a round of applause. I like your points about no-brainer solutions, the unintended consequences of partnering with different groups, and that we can't just, have the lowest common denominator. Given that I'm going to give us 4 more minutes, I'm wondering if governments in the room can talk about how they look at funding structures, governments and the private sector, governments and private sector look at funding in a way that can be helpful so that we're not investing either in silver bullets or things that don't work, or that we can't just build the wall for the dam a little bit higher, that we don't have to go through all that bureaucracy.
I would like to make a case for the private sector, but before that, let's first of all acknowledge that the funding we get from international donors should be seen as catalytic. We need to accept that funding from international donors and philanthropic will be catalytic. So the question is, how do we capitalize on the catalytic nature of that funding and ensure that we use it in a way that will result in more funding with impact and scalability. So that's important. We also need to take into consideration that government funding takes quite some time. And so if we recognize that it takes time and also requires a lot more engagement, then one of the things we'll be thinking about might be some out-of-box thinking, like what Dakar has described. Are we engaging national governments, or are we talking to provincial or state governments? Where exactly is the money? Who makes the decision? Because sometimes these decisions are done at a federal level, but the real money is at the state level. So where and who is interested in policy research? Is it national, or is it the state government or the local government? So understanding the political economy and in that geography is we need to begin to think about putting the private sector in the center of the conversation. But it's a stakeholder group that most of us do not know how to engage. As a matter of fact, the private sector is still more likely, it's usually an afterthought. Okay, yeah, this private sector, let's invite them to this meeting. And we don't really usually invite private sector to the meeting. We invite industry associations because we can relate to them, or we invite the IFDCs and co. So how do we begin to ensure that we design research projects, policy research projects that will be relevant to the private sector, that we understand what their needs really are? We also expect that they're not going to give us $200 million, but is there a way of encouraging a group of private sector companies that will focus on pre-competitive issues, those issues that do not necessarily create any monopoly or trade manipulation issues, but issues that are common to all of them, that a few of them could decide to say, you know what, let's put some money into that particular research. But also bearing in mind that they will be looking for results. And what's the ultimate result? The ultimate result is the right policy. And if they don't see that policy coming out very quickly, they could get quite discouraged. But I think investing in engagement with private sector certainly might be the way to go.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think investing, please give him a round of applause, please. I think if private sector is not brought to the table, especially when we're talking about sub-Saharan Africa, none of the things that we want to happen, including decreasing hunger and poverty and malnutrition, will happen. I also have a question though, does money from the private sector come with too many strings for the organizations in the room? Do they feel pressured and compelled to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do? And that's my final question for this audience. I lied, we're gonna go about 5 more minutes. Any thoughts on that? Because I do think that's important. There were a couple hands raised.
Thank you so much. My name is Yotam Kandawire. I'm representing the private sector. So I would like probably to respond to what the immediate speaker has said in the event that how do we bring in the private sector in terms of funding the policy research? I think I've got a couple of points that I'd jotted here that I feel that if they are properly structured, we should be able to come in as private sector. In the first place, we do not we intend to fund some of these policy research, but there are certain things that we need to put in perspective before that is done. Of course, we need, as a policy research, you need to identify common interests and benefits with the private sector. You also need to target the right partners, because there are certain things that you may end up shooting yourself in the foot because you go to the wrong partners. The third part is that you need to structure the funding models. Companies can fund specific parts of your research, unlike funding a $2 million contract, which is quite impossible for any business house. Also, building the long-term relationship with the private sector, I think, is also very, very critical. Demonstrating credibility and accountability is also very critical with the private sector, because we do not want to put, your little resources or high or hard-earned money into a project that you do not see the results. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Round of applause, please. Louder. Thank you. There's a question right here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Mohammed Zahraddin, from Niger. I work with ICRISAT.
Hold the microphone closer.
Okay, yeah. So, from my understanding or from my opinion, bringing in private sector will require first, from our side, to understand what are their dependencies, and then try to focus our research on as outcome building some business models for them and so on. So that will really keep their attention in order to really buy in our policy research, just to say.
Thank you for that. There's a comment over here. Give him a round of applause, please. You have to keep your energy up, or you're gonna fall asleep.
Yeah, Gideon Obare, Kenya. Just a question to Agra. You did indicate that you do at times provide some consultancy or calls for consultancy services. In this room today, I think what you see is a gathering from ANAPRI institutes. Do you think they do provide potential as consultancy service providers? And if so, what do you think need to be done so that you bring them on board? So single sourcing in part, in quotation marks, right? Number two, communication. How do we communicate correctly? It all depends. If for example, you want to support a government position and you are ready to provide information that reinforces that government position, then obviously you are a good candidate for government support, right? So how do we then kind of deal with conflict of interest here? In other words, where the government objective function differs from that of the think tank. So maybe the Gates Foundation might help us here, because it has a convening and economic, so that at least the institutes here can have some leeway whereby they can then provide the requisite information, particularly when I link now to what Badiana said, establishing parameters for continental level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Alan, I don't know if you want to respond quickly. You don't have to. We can move on. Okay. Because we're short on time, I want to go back to the private sector and in terms of accountability. And do you want to respond, sir?
Yeah, it was directed to me, so.
Please go ahead.
So just quickly, consider this initiative. Most of the resources are at country level. It is country teams that control resources. Of course, we do sometimes issue consultancies at headquarter level. So probably the change that you need to do is learn from those big consulting companies, how they write, proposals, how they are so nimble and respond quickly, and clarity of the communication. These are the kind of things you really need to adapt to be able. Otherwise, we are open to consider these institutions, but single sourcing is not allowed in our organization. It's a competitive process, so you have to be ready to compete. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So this is really my final question. I'm not lying this time. I want to turn to the private sector again and ask, what is the potential for you to collaborate with think tanks to help bridge the gap between research and action? Because I think this summit in particular has been so much about action that we don't want to just talk, we want to have action. So I'd love to hear from the private sector what you need to bridge that gap. In the back.
Thank you very much. So my name is Bruce Chisitu. I work for Innovative Solutions for Decision Agriculture, which is ISDA. And I'd love to share a practical example here. So we have developed an AI advisory for smallholder farmers. And we have already hit 30,000 farmers in Uganda, Kenya, Zambia. Now, we need to improve the maps that we are using, because we are using a soil map for Africa, which we have developed. However, we don't have data. Most of the institutions, the research institutions, don't want to share data to improve it. Governments have the data, but they don't want to share data. They don't want to share the data to improve the maps. Right now, because of the results are creating a good problem for research. So because of the 30,000 farmers that we have reached currently, we have now been tasked to form a consortium where we have a research institution, where we have a government entity and private sector to actually understand, for example, soil health. How can we influence practices in soil health? How can we influence the fertilizer sector? Now, the challenge we have is that, these collaborations are probably not coming out right. So who can help facilitate? Because there is need for there's need for policy, but policy needs research outputs to really make some of these decisions. But who is going to facilitate these connections to really happen? Okay? As I say, right now for us, there is that opportunity. There is a push. We have been challenged that why don't you hit 100,000 farmers next year and then do research, conduct research, so that we can use that research to influence, policy. So I really think that if we go that direction, collaboration, let's share data, let's improve what is existing, rather than reinventing the wheel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Round of applause. I think that's a perfect note to end on, that we need more collaboration and partnership, and we need someone to facilitate that. And whether it's the big players like AGRA or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or others like Communicate, facilitate those relationships, I think that's really important. Thank you so much. You can go eat lunch now. I'm sure you're starving. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Now we are having the lunch break. We'll see you at 2 p.m. sharp, if possible.
Welcome to the 11th Annual ANAPRI Stakeholders Conference, brought to you right from the land of Teranga, Dakar, Senegal. With the theme, From Policy to Practice, strengthening local institutions for sustainable food systems transformation in Africa. This conference is hosted by ISRABAM in Dakar, Senegal, and sponsored by key partners including the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, through the Feed and Future